welcome to Sloans Abroad. In today's episode, we are going to finally talk about the birth of Alden. We're going to talk about your birth now. So, Alden was born almost at 41 weeks. I think it was 41 and 5. By about 34, 35 weeks, I had already had everything set up for the birth. I had a special cart that a friend gave me that I loaded up with all of my birth supplies. I had things like Chuck's pads, something to suction the baby whenever he was born, lots of towels, plastic bags, a bowl for the placenta, trash bags, special things to make the beds with. We had it all. There was a lot of waiting. It feels like it took forever. Just because I'm this magical 40 weeks doesn't mean anything.
24 hours later.
Good morning. Guess who's still pregnant? Me. So, going to the pool today to go have a picnic and go swim.
24 hours later.
Good morning. I am still great with child. Had a contraction kick me out of bed at about 4 o'clock this morning, so we will see what happens.
Tomorrow for sure.
Ahem, we have forward movement on the baby situation. It's either going to be today or tomorrow, folks. So psyched. I went on a lot of walks, but not too many because I didn't want to be tired out by the time birth began. And just like with all of my other births, labor started and stopped for a few weeks, and that was okay. It's completely normal. In the industrial birth complex, they usually call this failure to progress, because you're not progressing as fast as the hospital staff would like, so they can fill their quota of patients in beds. Every night past my due date, I stayed up with my husband a little bit, waited on the contractions to start. Inevitably started and stopped so many times. We ended up staying up late playing Minecraft, and then finally 4 days after my due date on June 30th, contractions finally stayed consistent. This was it. It was 7:30 at night. We had just finished up dinner, and I sent the kids off to bed, and I rolled out my yoga mat onto my bedroom floor. I lit candles, had my twinkle lights on, I put on my headphones, and I had my music going. I had a lot of Breaking Benjamin, Red, the Frozen soundtrack, obviously, and a couple of other really favorite songs on a loop for a couple of hours until I got tired of it. I spent the first 4 hours of my labor on my yoga mat. I would rest on it whenever I was in between contractions. During contractions, I would rock back and forth, sing, vocalize. I spent the first 4 hours doing this, and it set such a good tone for the entire experience. I had snacks, protein bars, I had bananas and oranges, honey, and Gatorade for quick energy. I had it all set up beside my yoga mat on the floor, so every couple of contractions I reminded myself that I needed to hydrate. And I spent the first several hours of my labor alone. I think Scott came in a few times. He did some laundry, hung up some things, got some things tidied up, put away dinner, and then he just waited in the next room until I was ready for his help. Finally, between 1:30 and 2:30 in the morning, birth did not come to play. Definitely came to do a full-on knockout, drag out. It was pretty insane. Contractions got really, really hard during this period of time. It was like having a wave just slam into me over and over and over again. I hardly got any rest. By about 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, I hit transition, which is the period in time of your birth where you are very confused. This is the point where you want to give up. It's often characterized by vomiting, shaking, just the spins, not almost forgetting what you're even doing. It's really, really intense. After a while, I got in the shower, had not checked myself yet, and I really didn't want to. So I got into the shower and I pretty much got down, face down on the shower and just I cried and let it all out and really wanted it to be over. The moment I got out of the shower, my water broke. And to my surprise, the water was a murky brown. Alden had passed stool, he had passed meconium in the bag of water, which in a hospital setting would usually mean an emergency C-section. Thankfully, I had done a lot of research on this particular topic just in case, and I remembered that it was incredibly common for this to happen. It did not mean a sign of fetal distress, and as long as his heart tones were fine and I didn't develop a fever, we were good to go. I'm grateful that I spent a lot of time researching all possible variations of birth, and I was comfortable with this particular outcome. We pulled out the Doppler and listened to his heart rate during contractions and after contractions to see what the variability in his heart rate was. It was within the range of normal, it didn't go down too far, so we proceeded. So, in between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning, I experienced something called the pause. Well, the pause isn't mentioned in most birthing literature. In literature and conversation from midwives and other birth keepers, the pause is something that the majority of women will experience. Sometimes it's only 5 minutes of a pause. Sometimes it can be all the way to an hour. It's a period of time in which time seems to stop in birth. You've reached 10 centimeters and nothing's happening. In an industrial birth complex setting, they will begin all of their interventions to see, wait, why aren't things happening? A lot of the time, it's just the break that your body is asking for before you begin the pushing stage. So I checked myself to try to see if I could reach the baby's head. I couldn't feel a thing. I knew I was 10 centimeters because I had done an external and internal check. That's a story for another time, but there are ways to determine dilation externally as well as internally. Lots of cool different signs that your body will give you. So I called my husband and I said, hey, I need you to check me. So he checks me, and I was 10 centimeters, of course, but we still could not feel the baby's head. At that point, I had a total meltdown. And if I had been fully aware of everything that was going on and I wasn't so absolutely exhausted and just in the middle of birth, I would have known that any moment now, the baby would have been here. So I was asking myself absolutely ridiculous things like, where is my baby? Why isn't my baby here? Is there even a baby? I screamed and cried and really pitched a grade A fit. Because in my mind, now I had failed. I would have to call 119, rush off to the hospital, and all of my talk and grandeur about knowing my body and having a free birth and women trusting themselves would have all been for nothing. But of course, that is exactly the trick that birth comes to play on us all, to break us down until we are no longer who we were before. No matter how many times you've been a mother, you are never the same person you were. And that's why it's so important for women to pass through the veil, to pass through the transition phase, to experience the pause, to break down, even if it means an entire hour of breaking down, which can't happen in a hospital because that usually means there's something wrong. When there's not something wrong, your body just needs for you to break. So when the dramatics were over and I really thought that I was going to die, I was lying on my bed and I jumped up. And I think I remember saying something utterly cliche and dramatic like, I'm not dying today. And I wasn't. So I stood up and I had no instinct to push at all. No sudden feeling of wanting to bear down. But I knew it had to happen. I couldn't feel him, so I needed to bring him down myself. I stood up and I roared. I screamed bloody murder, and a lot louder than I probably needed to. I was very high in my throat instead of the low guttural tones that I needed. This triggered something called the fetal ejection reflex. It's when the body basically takes over and kind of feels like throwing up. Your body just kind of like throws up a baby. You can't stop it. Baby's coming. So I screamed and I roared and I bore down and I put one leg up on the bed and the baby's head finally came out. I vaguely remember my husband telling me to slow down, or more reminding me to slow down, but I said no, he needs to come out right now. Once his head came out, I screamed at my husband, "Get him out, get him out, get him out." And he did. His head kept wanting to come out and in, so I just said, finally, let's let it be over. I had him hook under his shoulder, pull him out, and bloop, there was a baby. Now, once Scott pulled the baby out, and at my request, I was doubled over the bed, just catching my breath. I couldn't believe it. It was finally over. But not yet. So before I turned around, I asked Scott if the baby was breathing yet. He said no, and that was okay. He was still hooked up to the placenta by his cord, which was doing all of the breathing for him. It felt like forever, but I finally turned around. The baby was suctioned, and we started rubbing his back, calling his name, until he woke up. His eyes opened, and he had come completely earthside. So, still kind of pouring blood, I grabbed my stethoscope before I ever took him from my husband, and I listened to his lungs. I wanted to make sure that there was nothing rattly or gunky stuck in his lungs, and that everything more or less sounded fine, which it did. And from there, I put on a robe, I took him into my arms, sat down on the bed, and we started nursing right away.
It was a long night, but I did a thing.
After a while, I felt the separation gush of the placenta start to release. The placenta was absolutely huge. I swear it was the size of the baby. So it took a little manual traction on my part to get it to come out the rest of the way. We plopped the placenta into a mixing bowl. After a while, cut the cord. I should have stayed in bed and nursed longer, but I absolutely needed a shower. And once the place was pretty much cleaned up and the kids slept through the entire thing, we called them in to meet their new baby brother. There's no way that a doctor in Korea would have allowed me to have my waters open, even if it was just a little bit, for that long. They would have surely given me a C-section because of the meconium, and they would have surely given me a C-section because of failure to progress at the end. What many birth keepers and midwives would have considered the pause, the doctors and surgeons would have seen a C-section. And I most certainly would have been an episiotomy because of the size of his head. I tore, and it was my first time tearing in all of my births. In the obstetric model, if a doctor sees that you are about to tear, they will make the executive decision, and in Korea, oftentimes without your consent or permission, will cut you because it's easier to stitch that way. But it is not necessarily easier to heal. I had no idea that I had sustained a 3rd-degree tear until several days after my birth. At that point, it was too late to go get it stitched. Spoiler alert, it healed fully and completely. And yours can too. In part 3, I will detail my postpartum healing plan, what I ate, how I healed, my postpartum fitness, postpartum emotions. It's going to be interesting. So thank you for sticking around for this long for all of the fun details, and I will see you in part 3. Are you a pig with a pig? That pig ain't kosher.
Ow.